it's a good question, right? How do you create an intentional moment for meaningful interaction when you have, your kids out of the house, but nonetheless other people have children and co-parenting, and there's a lot of businesses, animals, like the works. And so I think the most important thing to begin with is to say, what feels good to both of you, right? That's the first thing. So let's just say, between the two of you, like you said, you're fast-paced, you're up and down and around. He's going, okay, I've worked my whole damn life and I want to sit over here and have some peace, right? Well, it's not exactly an irreconcilable difference, but it's a difference, right? It's not irreconcilable in the classic sense, but it will require a negotiation. And the negotiation is something like, well, we want to cultivate some intimacy in the relationship, however that looks for you, right? It's different for different people. How much time do we want to give that, and how should it look? Right. So that's the first negotiation. How much, and then in what form? So let's just say he spends the day reading and doing his things and maybe puttering about a bit, and you're flitting around doing your thing. And now you're saying, okay, well, maybe we should spend an hour together, let's say, right? So then you decide, I'm making this up. I mean, this is for you to fill in. Then you'll decide, maybe for people who have, I know you have kids together. No, you have both kids that you're co-parenting, right? So that might look very different. You might have 10 minutes. You might have an hour or an afternoon once a week or whatever, right? Yes, right. But that's exactly the point, right? If it's a life sentence, how do you make it such that it's good, right? I mean, we're laughing, but that is a real concern, right? Because if you are in a long-term relationship, there is an aspect of that that's like a life sentence, right? In the good and in the bad. And if you have if you would be, I'm not even going to come up with the classic sense of the life sentence, but let's just say you are meditating for the rest of your life in a cave, let's say, which probably sounds pretty damn good to you at this point. So how would you feather that cave, so to speak, or not, so it's meaningful? And that's true in relationship too. It's like, if you are spending the rest of your life together, or at least you intend that, how would you make it meaningful? And then that's the place where you go, okay, well, what would be meaningful maybe to George is that he'll tell you a little bit about the things he read. Right? Maybe that would be meaningful, where he goes, this is what I'm really interested in right now, and I'm like really fascinated by this, or I want to find out more about this. And he gets the time and the space to do that. That will require that you stop zooming about, of course, and actually give him time. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we'll do an entire thing on how do you give your partner the things that they want. So maybe this will be really actually fleshed out for the two of you. So then George would say, my idea of having some nice time with you is X. I'd like for us to sit outside as the sun sets, there's a drink or not, whatever, sparkling water, wine, whatever. I want to read you some things that I'm really interested in, and I want to talk about it. And then you go, okay, I can do that, right? And then maybe you say, I'm sure there's something, well, I want to hike up this mountain really fast, and I want to see the sunset from up there, and I want to, sit there and merge with nature and roll around and whatever, right? And then he goes, okay, I can do that. Not every day, but, on occasion. And then you do that. And then when you have figured that out, then there is a trick, and this is the generosity. And the generosity is that you then do something that really supports the other person in the thing that they want. So, for instance, if he wants to talk about something, you kind of, like, or read you something, you bring something to that delights him. Maybe you secretly read up on it and now you can actually discuss it with him, right? Or you bring him a book on the topic or a YouTube video on the topic or something that you like, and you actively participate instead of being the victim of the, of the demand. You actively participate. When you let go of the thing, which is the thing of relationship, right? These things are fairly apparent. You kind of know what your partner wants, but you get into this. So, but if it's really held, and this is why, when people talk about sacred space or whatever, it doesn't have to be wafting incense and wearing lavender colored gauze, right? It can be setting up a time. And then when the time's done, and it's like, oh, good, this was great. You end on a high note. And then you do your thing again, your separate thing, or not. Cultivating curiosity for somebody else's interests is typically what we do in the beginning of a relationship. How many of you here have pretended vigorously that they enjoyed something that they absolutely loathed in the beginning of a relationship? That's why you do it via the entry of what the person likes versus arbitrarily doing it because it feels like you should be doing that. Yeah. So I'd play around with that. And it doesn't have to be an hour, and it doesn't always have to be a big deal, but even if you just make a cup of tea and invite him over. Yeah, I mean, it can go both ways. Some people find it much, much easier to receive praise from a stranger than from a significant other, because there's patterns in the relationship that make it such that always feels like it's fake, or it's a foreplay to something else, whatever the something else is, meaning it is a condition, right? You know how some people give the compliment sandwich and they go, well, you did really well there, but I really hated this, and then you did really well there. Like when people do that kind of stuff, while that is advised by therapists or whatever, it conditions people to no longer open to praise, for instance, because they know that the next thing that happens is some kind of criticism. So this is just something to know, right? That whole shit sandwich or compliment sandwich. While that is an appropriate thing to do, maybe with your employee, with your spouse, it's almost like some kind of a I don't know, a rat having to get intermittent, rewards, or shocks, exactly. Except that it's very, very predictable. It's like, oh, here it comes. I really liked how you, And that happens a lot. So for some people, it's hard because of that, because they've had some relational dynamics. And then it's easier from a stranger because it feels almost like they don't really know you. So if they see something, it must be apparent, right? But then for other people, it is the exact opposite. They go, what the hell is this person wanting from me? And how could they know these things, right? They don't trust a stranger, but they do trust their own family or spouse. So it depends on the dynamics. They're just good things to understand. And then let's just say you are somebody who does the compliment sandwich or shit sandwich, then maybe stop that, right? Where you just give praise and then just walk off and they're like, oh, and kind of decondition that thing. Or when your partner does that, go, what do you want, right? Don't do the thing, and like start slicing it apart so that criticism can happen and praise can happen, and they're not necessarily coupled in some way, So, yeah, these are good findings. Yeah, I mean, I think everything that we're talking about comes down to there's many slices in there, but one of the slices is that we tend to commodify people, our partners as well as friends and family and whatever, where there is a tit for tat or a transaction, and to kind of get out of the transaction into what's really important, which is you want to give something to them and you want to receive something from them, which is more often true than not, right? When we're really honest, we want to love and be loved. And when the transaction gets pulled out of there, then what's left is actual genuine enjoyment in somebody else's, when somebody else lights up or gets moved, or even when you give it, sometimes it's just so nourishing, and it's a good practice to have with your partner, but also with other people. Typically, how we choose partners is that we find the person who brings the best and the worst out in us, right? And that's just how it goes because of childhood imprints and, all of that stuff. So she knows what to say that hits you just the worst way. You know what to say that hits her just the worst way. So the residue is typically the stuff that's connected to things that really don't have anything to do with the relationship, but with previous imprints. That's the stuff that stays, right? Because if it's a clean fight, so to speak, right? Let's say you're fighting with Tao, who you've never met, and you're having an argument about whatever, the gate. It's probably not going to hit anything really massive, right? It's going to be, well, she's a bitch, well, he's an asshole. And then it's like, okay, well, and then afterwards you're like, oh, sorry, I was a bit rude at the gate. And she goes, yeah, I was a bit overreacting. And then it's done, right? But what you two have, which is typically what happens in a relationship, is that somehow she can say the things that you already believe about yourself from deep dark back when shit started to get serious when you were 2 or something like that, or 3, right? And the other way around. So that residue is the residue of the past experience that still has your behavior such that you lock heads. Yeah. Typically residue isn't from the relationship, because that you can work out and that you can typically grow. The residue is the stuff that came before. Well, typically childhood imprints, right? You don't love me, or I can never do good enough, and like those kind of sentences, when you hear them in your head, that's the residue. So what you would have to do in your mind, right, in the aftermath, is determine her actual intention, because we have to assume you are together, right? You're doing many good things together. We have to assume that she somehow meant well, right? And so that somehow meant well, if you can determine that and praise that, it will free you from the goodness. You have to just assume goodness. But this is one of the hardest things to do in relationship, is you have to assume goodness. Yeah. You have to go, what is she really worried about when she says, why the fuck are you calling 16 times, right? It's because she doesn't want the Manny to fuzz out and leave because Manny feels overwhelmed by the attention, right? That's really what it is. So it's for the sake of your child. And that you can praise. And it bypasses you as the behavioral misfit, right? Well, you actually wanted the exact same thing. You wanted well-being for your child, So assume goodness, try to find the thing that is behind it. And maybe you have to ask and then praise that. Even when we're old dogs, we can actually learn this, where we go, and this is really important in relationship, where you can go, you get enough of a pause so you can go, a second, right? Now, of course, when you get skilled as a partner, you can have your partner is maybe not quite as riled up as you. They can do things, but the first step is you go, I know that one, I know that one, and then you that should give you enough of a pause, but maybe not immediately, but in the aftermath, right? Maybe you fly off the handle, you go away, and you're like, and then you go, oh, thanks for actually looking out for me. I couldn't recognize that. Yeah. Sometimes there's a post-mortem, so to speak. You have to pick over the carcass of your relationship at that moment and patch it back up. Yeah. Yes, you could also use praise, right? You could also use praise. So in that situation, you would have to just say, I'm actually not. I'm. What sounds like being judgmental is actually just really interested in how you're perceiving this or seeing this. I really like that you're like, whatever, leaning into this or asking about this or being upset about this. I like your passion about this or your dedication or whatever. You find something that you can actually, if you weren't suddenly under attack, so to speak, that you could go, oh, interesting. That's actually, I never saw that. Or, oh, this is a sign of X, right? Some kind of passionate defense of something. And you praise that. Yeah, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, my mother is a jiu-jitsu master of that sort. It's really quite interesting. My parents, who have never, done a day of self-help in their entire life, are now 83 and still married. And my mother did this thing. I saw it. I mean, she would do it so brilliantly when my father would get upset about something. My father's very, I don't know what the word would be, passionate, I guess, or like in when I was younger, hot-tempered, not like abusive or anything, but definitely quite fiery. And so my mother would do this weird, I don't know, it had some kind of a background in their relationship, right? But if my dad would start getting like this thing, she'd do this weird sideways hop towards him. Like some kind of a crab hop thing. And it would crack him up immediately and totally de-escalate the situation. And he would laugh, and she'd laugh, and then she'd like ruffle his hair or hug him or kiss him, and then they would move on. And she still does it. The other day I was in Vienna, and I took my parents to a Coldplay concert with 83. It was really cool, really, really cool. And so, they were in a hotel room, and there was some argument about something to do with packing the thingy or whatever. And my father's getting really irritated. And my, 83-year-old mother with an ankle replacement did the hop, just shuffled sideways with this funny facial expression. And and that was it, right? So. And I mean, they've done this for 50-something years that they've been married, and it still works, even though he knows what she's doing, because it breaks the state, right? And so that's a state break is a good way to interrupt those things as well. So a state break could be something that's very funny, something physical, like a slapstick kind of physical. It could also be something somewhat obscene. Right, so you can always go weirdly sexual with it, not necessarily in action, but in expression or wording. That always works, right? Yes. So that's typically how you can handle somebody who's starting to, boil over. Yeah. Try to hop. It's my mother's patented hop. TM.